All right. So you're a philosopher writer.
Yep.
And you need like a crash course on Henri Bergson.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, get ready, because we are going deep into the mind of this thinker who really like shook things up in the early 20th century, challenging how we understand time and perception and even laughter.
Oh, yeah.
We've got his key writings plus some analysis from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy to guide us through this.
Awesome.
So, yeah, let's get into it.
What's really fascinating about Bergson, especially for like a philosopher like you, is how he was totally okay with challenging like the Western canon of thought.
Okay.
He pushed back against the rigidness, like the mechanistic worldview that was so strong in his time.
Right.
He was arguing for a much more like fluid and dynamic understanding of reality.
Yeah, I was reading about his life, and it's interesting that this guy who became such a philosophical giant almost went down a totally different path.
I know, right?
He was like a math whiz.
Math quiz.
When he was a young student, like winning awards, solving complex problems. But then he kind of swerved and chose philosophy.
Totally.
There's even that anecdote about his math teacher being so disappointed and saying something like, "You could have been a mathematician. You will be a mere philosopher."
That's a great anecdote, and it kind of hints at something really crucial about Bergson's approach.
Okay.
He never actually rejects the rigor of logic or math.
Yeah.
It's almost like he was trying to build a bridge between intuition and reason.
Okay.
And realizing that both of them were essential to truly understanding the world.
Yeah.
You can kind of see this play out in his concept of duration.
Okay.
Which is probably his most famous and influential idea.
Yeah, duration.
Yeah.
I confess that one I wrestled with a bit.
Yeah.
The best analogy I came up with was music.
Okay.
Like you can't grasp a melody just by looking at the individual notes on a page.
Right.
It's the flow. It's how the notes connect over time that give it meaning.
It gives it meaning, yeah.
Duration, at least as far as I understand it, is kind of like that.
Yeah. That is a really insightful analogy, and Bergson would totally agree with you that duration can't just be like chopped up into these neat little pieces like we try to do with time.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing it as a series of separate, measurable ticks on a clock, he wants us to experience it like a continuous flowing river, carrying all of the past moments along with it.
Right.
He calls this a qualitative multiplicity.
Okay.
I know that sounds like jargon.
A little bit, yeah.
But what he means is that duration is not about quantity. It's about quality of experience, the way that time is felt and lived.
Okay, so it's not just about measuring time,
Yeah.
but about like experiencing it in all its messy, unpredictable, constantly evolving reality.
Yeah.
But hold on, you mentioned qualitative multiplicity.
Yes.
Does that mean there's like a quantitative one too?
You were sharp. You're picking up on this.
Okay.
Yes. Bergson distinguishes between two types of multiplicity.
Right.
The quantitative kind is pretty straightforward.
Yep.
Think about counting sheep in a field or books on a shelf.
Right.
It's about like distinct separate units that can be measured and added up.
Okay.
But qualitative multiplicity, that's the realm of experience.
Okay.
The stuff that can't be easily quantified, like emotions, memories, the feeling of time passing.
Right.
Those all fall into this category.
So we got these two types of multiplicity.
Yeah.
But how do they actually show up in our lives?
That's a great question.
Can you give me like a concrete example of how this works?
Yeah, let's take one of Bergson's own examples.
Okay.
Sympathy.
Okay.
So he describes it not as a single emotion,
Right.
but as a progression of feelings that unfolds over time. So first you encounter someone in pain, right?
Yeah.
And there's like a natural aversion, almost a shrinking back.
Okay.
But then something shifts.
Okay.
You start to understand their suffering on a deeper level.
Right.
Which leads to this feeling of selflessness, this willingness to help, and ultimately you end up experiencing this sense of connection with the other person.
That's really interesting. So sympathy isn't just a static feeling.
No.
It's like a journey,
It is.
a process of transformation that unfolds over time.
Exactly. And for Bergson, that journey, that unfolding of feeling and understanding, that's duration in action.
Okay.
It's a process that can't be reduced to like a simple equation or a single point in time.
Okay.
It has depth, it has movement. And for him, this is where we connect with the true nature of life itself.
Yeah. This is making me rethink my own experiences in like a whole new light.
Good.
Okay. So we got duration, we got multiplicity.
Yeah.
But how did Bergson arrive at these ideas?
Right.
Like as a philosopher, I'm curious about his overall approach.
So he was engaging with some of the biggest names in philosophy, you know, especially Kant. And what's fascinating is that Bergson felt that Kant's philosophy, while brilliant, was ultimately limiting.
Okay.
Kant argued that absolute knowledge was impossible.
Right. We could only ever grasp the phenomenal world, the world as it appears to us,
Right.
not the world as it truly is.
Okay.
But Bergson wanted to find a way to get beyond these limitations.
So instead of just analyzing things from the outside, Bergson thought we need to find a way to get inside them, to experience them directly.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
He called this intuition.
Okay.
And this concept is at the very heart of his philosophy.
Okay.
Intuition for Bergson is a kind of direct knowing.
Okay.
It's an immersion in an experience that goes beyond the limits of our normal analytical intelligence.
Right.
It's about grasping the inner dynamism of reality.
Okay.
The flow of becoming that underlies all things.
Okay.
He uses a really great example, the color orange.
Okay.
So we might think it's just one solid color.
Right.
But if we really look closely, experience it fully, we'll notice all these subtle shades and variations blending together. There's a whole spectrum within that single color.
That's a really powerful image.
So intuition is about unlocking these hidden depths in our experiences.
Yes.
Seeing the nuances and complexities that we usually miss when we're stuck in our habitual ways of thinking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I can see why this would be appealing to a philosopher.
For sure.
All right. So we got intuition.
Yes.
And for Bergson, this intuitive approach is crucial for understanding the relationship between perception and memory.
Yes.
Which he explores in depth in his book, Matter and Memory.
One of his most well-known works.
Yeah. Can you give me a quick rundown of the key takeaways there?
Well, in a nutshell, Bergson argues that we tend to create a simplified view of the world based on our immediate needs and actions. Our perception is limited by what's useful for survival in the moment, but true memory, he says, is this vast reservoir of experience. A much richer and more complete record of our lives.
Right.
It holds the potential for a much deeper understanding of who we are and how we relate to the world.
It's like our brains are like icebergs, right? What we consciously perceive is just the tip.
Yeah.
But there's this whole mountain of memory submerged beneath the surface.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Bergson uses a similar image. He calls it the cone of memory.
Okay.
So imagine a cone, right, with the point representing our present perception.
Right.
And as you go further down the cone, the memories become broader and deeper.
Right.
Representing our past experiences and all their complexity.
So we have this incredible well of memories within us.
Yes.
But how do we actually access it all?
Right.
Is it like digging through a dusty attic?
That's where things get even more interesting.
Oh.
Because Bergson talks about memory as a dynamic process, not a static storage space.
Right.
He describes it as a process of rotation and contraction.
Okay.
Rotation is about bringing things into focus, selecting certain memories from the vast reservoir of our past. Contraction is about narrowing down those memories, focusing them into something that we can actually use in the present moment. It's not just passive recollection.
Right.
It's about actively shaping and engaging with our past to inform our present experience.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yes, we have.
Duration, multiplicity, intuition, and this complex interplay between perception and memory.
Yes.
And I know as a philosopher, you'll find this next part particularly interesting.
Okay.
Because Bergson didn't shy away from tackling big questions about the nature of reality itself.
Absolutely.
For example, his work on evolution offers a truly unique perspective.
Absolutely. And this is where Bergson really challenges the dominant scientific thinking of his time.
Okay.
In his book, Creative Evolution, he argues that evolution isn't just this blind mechanistic process driven by random mutations and natural selection.
Yeah.
Instead, he sees it as a creative unfolding guided by a vital impulse, a kind of life force that he calls the élan vital.
Hold on. Are we talking about some kind of mystical energy here?
Not mysticism.
Okay.
I can see why you might get that impression, though. What's fascinating is that Bergson identifies two major tendencies at play in evolution.
Okay.
Instinct and intelligence.
Okay.
So instinct for him is this direct, almost unconscious way of knowing the world.
Okay.
Perfectly suited for survival. You see it in animals.
Right.
Their innate ability to navigate, to find food, and to protect themselves.
Right.
Intelligence, on the other hand, is our human capacity to analyze, create tools, plan ahead, and try to control our environment.
So instinct is about being in the moment, while intelligence is about stepping back and trying to figure things out, to impose our will on the world.
Exactly. And Bergson's point is that both instinct and intelligence have their roots in the same vital impulse, this creative energy that's driving evolution forward. But he suggests that intelligence, with all of its problem-solving abilities, can sometimes pull us away from that direct experience of life that instinct provides. We get so caught up in our heads, in our plans and schemes, that we lose touch with that vital flow of reality.
So it's like our own cleverness. Our ability to think and analyze is actually getting in the way of truly understanding life.
That's a good way of putting it.
That's a pretty radical idea.
It is. It definitely challenges our usual assumptions about what it means to be human and how we relate to the world. And it raises this crucial question that Bergson wants us to grapple with. How can we use our intelligence with all its limitations to reconnect with that creative impulse, that vital flow that's driving evolution forward?
That's a big question.
It is a big question.
And it leads us right into another area where Bergson made significant contributions, the realm of morality and religion. He even wrote a whole book about it called The Two Sources of Morality and Religion.
He did.
So we've talked about time perception, the limits of our intelligence. What does all of that have to do with ethics and our sense of the sacred?
So Bergson, as always, starts by drawing a distinction, this time between what he calls closed and open morality. Closed morality is all about rules, social cohesion, and it's often tied to what he calls static religion. Think about systems of belief that are based on fear obligation or a very rigid set of doctrines. It's about maintaining order and control, often within a specific group or society.
So it sounds like a kind of rule book for how to behave in a specific society. A way of ensuring conformity and social stability.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing open morality is quite different.
You are right. Open morality is driven by something far more powerful and expansive. He calls them creative emotions. Think about emotions like love, compassion, heroism, a sense of awe or wonder in the face of something much greater than ourselves. These emotions for Bergson point towards a more dynamic and inclusive kind of spirituality. One that's not bound by rigid rules or limited to a particular group.
So instead of following like a set of predefined rules, open morality is about tapping into something deeper, something that connects us to the bigger picture. To the creative flow of life itself.
Precisely. And remember how Bergson talked about creative evolution being driven by that vital impulse, that creative energy? Well, he's suggesting that true morality, the kind that transcends social conventions and rigid rules, comes from the same source. It's about aligning ourselves with the creative force that's constantly pushing life forward in new and unpredictable ways.
So it's like he's connecting morality to the same vital impulse that drives evolution. It's all starting to come together.
It is.
This is really making me rethink my own assumptions about morality and ethics.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
But I have to ask, where does Kant fit into all of this?
That's a great question.
Didn't he also have a lot to say about morality?
He did. And Bergson was a close reader of Kant's work. But ultimately, he disagreed with Kant's emphasis on duty and the categorical imperative. Remember how Kant argued that we should act only according to that maxim, whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law?
The categorical imperative. It's a cornerstone of Kantian ethics.
But Bergson argues that while Kant's intentions were noble, his theory makes this fundamental psychological error. Now, by that, he doesn't mean that Kant was mentally unstable or anything like that. He's pointing to a flaw in Kant's reasoning.
I'm intrigued. What's this error all about?
Well, Bergson says that Kant mistakes the feeling of obligation, which is often tied to specific social rules and expectations, for the true source of morality. So remember how we talked about closed morality being rooted in social cohesion? So when we resist those social norms, we experience this kind of psychological tension, a sense of restriction. But Bergson argues that if we look at the whole of obligation, rather than just focusing on isolated rules, obedience actually feels quite natural to us.
So he's saying that deep down, we actually want to follow the rules.
It's not so much about wanting to follow the rules, but about recognizing that we have this natural inclination towards the stability and structure that social norms provide.
Okay.
It's like a habit that's been ingrained in us through evolution and social conditioning.
Okay.
So when Kant emphasizes the severity and inflexibility of duty, he's actually externalizing this feeling of tension we experience when we resist those ingrained habits.
Okay, I think I'm following.
Good.
So what's the alternative?
Right.
If Kant's categorical imperative isn't the answer,
Yeah.
what is?
Bergson says that true morality comes from a different source altogether.
Okay.
He calls it the impetus of love.
Okay.
And this, like those creative emotions we talked about earlier, isn't about reason or rules. It's about something far more powerful and expansive.
Is he talking about like romantic love here?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
It's more about a kind of expansive creative energy that goes beyond personal feelings and desires.
Huh?
Think about the love of a mystic for the divine, or the love of an artist for their creation.
Right.
It's a love that inspires us to connect, to act in ways that go beyond our own self-interest, and contribute to the flourishing of life itself.
So it's a deep, almost spiritual kind of love that connects us to something larger than ourselves.
Exactly. And for Bergson, this kind of love is the true source of open morality because it leads to actions that are not driven by fear or obligation, but by a profound sense of connection and creative energy. It's about participating in the creative flow of the universe, becoming a conduit for the vital impulse that's driving evolution forward.
Wow, so it's like he's connecting morality to the same vital impulse that drives evolution?
Yes, he is.
It's all starting to come together.
It is.
This is so fascinating.
It is fascinating stuff.
But we've covered a lot of ground already, and I can see we're just scratching the surface of Bergson's thought.
You're right, we are.
Okay, so we've established that Bergson's ideas are, to put it mildly, pretty radical.
Yeah.
But as a philosopher, I'm curious how, his work has been received by others in the field.
Well, like any truly innovative thinker, he's had his share of admirers and critics.
Right.
In the early 20th century, he was super influential, especially in France. Thinkers like Proust, Sartre, Deleuze, they all acknowledged his impact. He even had this public philosophical debate with Einstein in 1922.
Wow.
Can you imagine a philosopher debating a physicist today and having it be like front page news?
That's amazing, a philosophical celebrity.
I know, right?
But I imagine not everyone was on board with his ideas.
Right.
Who were some of his main critics?
As you might expect, some philosophers found his emphasis on intuition a bit too. Well, mystical for their taste.
Right.
They argued that it lacked the rigor and clarity of more traditional analytical philosophical methods. And then there were, of course, critiques from the scientific community, especially regarding his ideas about evolution.
Yeah, that whole élan vital concept, the idea of a creative force driving evolution.
Yeah.
It definitely seems like it would ruffle some scientific feathers.
It definitely went against the prevailing materialist and mechanistic views of the time.
Right.
But here's what's interesting. Even some of Bergson's most ardent critics acknowledged the importance of his work. They recognized that he was grappling with fundamental questions about the nature of lifetime and consciousness in ways that traditional philosophy just hadn't been able to.
So he was a disruptor.
Yeah.
Shaking things up and forcing people to rethink their basic assumptions.
Totally.
But his influence didn't last forever, right?
That's true. His popularity waned somewhat in the mid-20th century as other philosophical movements like existentialism and structuralism gained prominence. But there's been like a resurgence of interest in his work in recent decades.
Why do you think that is?
I think there are a few reasons for this Bergson renaissance. First, there's a growing awareness of the limitations of purely rational and mechanistic ways of thinking. You know, we're facing complex challenges in the 21st century, climate change, social and political upheaval, rapid technological advancements. All these things require us to think outside the box, to tap into our creativity and our intuition in order to find solutions.
But Bergson is speaking to our current anxieties, our need for new ways of understanding and responding to the world.
Absolutely. And second, there's the growing interest in embodiment and the role of the body in shaping our experience. Bergson was way ahead of his time in recognizing the importance of the body, not just as like a physical object, but as a source of knowledge and creative potential.
Yeah, his concept of duration is all about lived experience how time feels in our bodies, not just how we measure it on a clock.
Exactly. And finally, I think there's a growing appreciation for the spiritual dimension of Bergson's thought.
Okay.
He was deeply concerned with questions about meaning, purpose, our connection to something larger than ourselves. And these are questions that are becoming increasingly urgent in our secular age.
Yeah, it makes sense that in a world that can often feel fragmented and uncertain, people are searching for those deeper connections, that sense of meaning and purpose.
I think so.
Right.
So even though Bergson might not be like a household name like some other philosophical giants,
Okay.
his ideas are more relevant than ever.
Right.
He offers us a way to think about ourselves and the world that's both intellectually stimulating and, I would argue, spiritually enriching.
I have to admit, I'm really starting to see the appeal of Bergson.
Good.
Especially for someone like me who's immersed in the world of philosophy.
Yeah.
But what would you say is like the one big takeaway?
Right.
The essence of Bergson's message for the modern world?
That's a great question. I think the most important thing Bergson teaches us is that life isn't a static thing.
Okay.
It's a process of constant becoming.
Right.
A creative unfolding that's always exceeding our grasp.
Okay.
And he urges us to embrace that dynamism, to cultivate our intuition, and to recognize that we're all part of this huge, interconnected flow of time and experience.
That's beautifully put.
Thank you.
And that's a message that can be both liberating and empowering. If life is a constant process of becoming,
right,
then we're not bound by fixed categories or predetermined outcomes.
Exactly.
We have the capacity to shape our own destiny.
Yeah.
To contribute to the ongoing evolution of life itself.
I love that.
Okay, we've explored some of Bergson's most important ideas like duration, multiplicity, intuition, creative evolution. But he was such a prolific writer.
He was.
Tackling all sorts of philosophical problems.
Yeah.
Is there anything he didn't write about?
That's an interesting question. And it actually reveals a key insight into Bergson's approach to philosophy itself.
Okay.
So while he wrote extensively on metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, aesthetics, he never really delved into the philosophy of language.
Oh, that's true. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
It's partly because Bergson viewed language as kind of an obstacle to true knowledge.
Right.
Remember how we emphasized the limitations of conceptual thinking?
Yeah.
Well, he felt that language with its fixed categories and abstract symbols could actually distort our understanding of reality, trapping us in a web of artificial distinctions.
So he saw language as a way of reducing the complexity of experience into like neat little boxes that don't quite capture the fluidity and dynamism of life itself.
Exactly. For Bergson, the richness and dynamism of life couldn't be fully captured in words.
Okay.
He believed that true understanding came through direct experience, through intuition and immersion in the flow of duration. Language could point towards this reality, but it couldn't fully grasp it.
So language was too static.
Yeah.
Too rigid, too bound by fixed categories to express the dynamic, evolving nature of reality as Bergson understood it.
Precisely, and yet paradoxically. Bergson himself was a master of language.
Right.
His writing is incredibly vivid and evocative, full of metaphors and images that try to draw the reader into his unique way of seeing the world.
It's like he was using language to point beyond language, to gesture towards something that couldn't be fully expressed in words.
Yeah.
He was trying to awaken that intuitive understanding in his readers.
Exactly, and that's what makes his work so compelling.
Right.
It's a constant challenge, a provocation to think differently, to move beyond the limits of our usual ways of knowing.
This has been such a thought-provoking dive into Bergson's thought.
Yeah, it has.
It's amazing how his ideas, even though they were developed over a century ago,
I know,
still feel so relevant and challenging today.
They did.
And as a philosopher, I can definitely see why he's having a resurgence.
Absolutely.
But there's one more aspect of Bergson I wanted to touch on.
Okay.
Something that might surprise our listener.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
Okay.
Are we talking about his interest in the, shall we say, less conventional aspects of reality?
Exactly. I'm talking about Bergson's fascination with mysticism and even psychic phenomena.
Right.
Seems like quite a leap from his rigorous philosophical work.
It might seem like a leap at first glance,
but
it actually fits quite well within his overall worldview.
Okay.
Remember how he emphasized the limitations of our normal modes of perception?
Right.
And the importance of cultivating intuition?
Yeah.
Well, he believed that these unusual experiences, often dismissed as unscientific or superstitious,
Right.
could offer valuable insights into the nature of consciousness.
Okay.
And the limits of our ordinary senses.
Wait, really? The guy who was so focused on experience and intuition was also delving into the paranormal.
Oh, absolutely. He was a member and even president of the Society for Psychical Research in London.
Wow.
He was particularly interested in phenomena like telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognitive dreams.
That's wild. So he saw these mystical and psychic experiences as another way of accessing deeper levels of reality, beyond the reach of our ordinary senses and our limited rational minds.
Exactly. He wasn't afraid to explore unconventional paths in his search for truth.
Right.
And I think that's part of what makes his work so enduringly relevant.
Right.
He was always pushing the boundaries, challenging us to expand our understanding of what's possible.
Right.
And to question our assumptions about the nature of reality itself.
I love that about Bergson.
Me too.
He was a true philosophical explorer, always willing to venture into uncharted territory.
Absolutely. And I think that spirit of exploration is something we can all learn from, whether we're philosophers or not.
Right.
Bergson reminds us that the world is full of mystery and wonder, and that we should never stop questioning, exploring, and seeking deeper understanding.
Well said. So we've talked about how Bergson challenged philosophical giants like Kant,
Yeah.
how his ideas influenced major figures in literature and art, and even how he explored the fringes of human experience with his interest in psychic phenomena.
Totally.
It's clear that he was a complex and multifaceted thinker whose work continues to resonate with us today.
I agree.
But as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious to hear your perspective on something.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that Bergson's ideas can be especially relevant
Right.
for those of us who are engaged in the philosophical life. Can you say more about that?
Yeah.
What's the particular appeal of Bergson for philosophers?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest draws is his emphasis on creativity.
Okay.
And the open-ended nature of reality. For Bergson, the universe isn't this fixed deterministic system.
Okay.
It's a constant process of becoming a dynamic unfolding that's always exceeding our grasp.
So it's a philosophy that embraces uncertainty,
Yeah.
possibility, even a bit of chaos.
Exactly. And that's a very different perspective from some of the more rigid, systematic philosophies that have dominated Western thought.
Right.
Bergson's saying, hey, the world is messier and more unpredictable than we like to think.
Yeah.
And that's okay. In fact, that's where the real excitement lies.
Okay.
In the unknown, in the ever-changing flow of duration.
I see what you mean. It's a philosophy that invites us to be more curious,
Mm-hmm.
more open to new experiences, more willing to let go of our preconceptions
Yeah.
and embrace the mystery of existence.
Precisely. And that's incredibly liberating for a philosopher.
Okay.
Because it means that our quest for understanding is never finished.
Right.
There's always more to discover, new insights, to uncover new connections to make.
It's like he's giving us permission to play,
Yeah.
to experiment, to explore the world with a sense of wonder and childlike curiosity,
Yeah.
even when tackling the most serious philosophical questions.
Exactly. And that's a precious gift, especially in a world that can often feel stifling and predictable.
Yeah.
Bergson reminds us that philosophy is an adventure,
Right.
a journey of discovery.
Mhm.
It's full of surprises and unexpected turns.
I love that way of looking at it.
Me too.
But I think Bergson's ideas have broader implications as well, don't they?
I think so.
What can his philosophy teach us about living a meaningful life in the modern world, even for those of us who aren't professional philosophers?
You're absolutely right. I think one of the most important lessons Bergson offers is the value of slowing down,
Okay.
of paying attention to the present moment.
Right.
Remember how we talked about the difference between clock time and live time,
Yeah.
between quantitative and qualitative multiplicity?
Right.
You know, we're so caught up in measuring and quantifying our lives, trying to fit everything into neat little boxes,
Right.
that we often miss the richness and depth of experience
Yeah.
that's unfolding right in front of us.
It's like we're so busy checking our watches and scheduling our days that we forget to actually live our lives, to savor the simple joys and appreciate the beauty that surrounds us.
Exactly. And this is where Bergson's concept of intuition becomes so crucial.
Okay.
It's about cultivating that capacity for direct, unmediated experience.
Right.
That ability to immerse ourselves in the flow of life and appreciate its beauty and complexity without constantly analyzing and dissecting it.
So it's about being more mindful, more present, more attuned to the subtle nuances of our experience.
Precisely. And this isn't just some new age self-help mantra.
Right.
This is a profound philosophical insight
Yeah.
that has the power to transform our relationship with the world.
Okay.
When we slow down and really pay attention, we start to see the interconnectedness of everything, the way our actions ripple outwards and affect the world around us.
It's like the butterfly effect, right?
Yeah.
A small change in one place can have huge consequences elsewhere.
Exactly. And Bergson's philosophy helps us to see those connections.
Okay.
To appreciate that intricate web of relationships that make up the fabric of reality.
Okay. I think I'm starting to get the picture.
Good.
Bergson is offering us a way to live more consciously, more creatively, more connected to ourselves and the world around us.
Exactly. It's a philosophy of engagement, of participation in the ongoing evolution of life itself.
So it sounds like Bergson is offering like a really powerful and inspiring vision.
Yeah.
A way of being in the world that's both like intellectually stimulating and deeply meaningful.
Absolutely.
But I have to admit, also feels a bit daunting, you know?
Yeah.
He's asking us to cultivate intuition, to embrace the flow of duration, to be more present and mindful.
Right.
All that sounds great in theory.
Yeah.
But how do we actually like put it into practice?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one that Bergson himself grappled with.
Okay.
He didn't offer us like a simple set of instructions or techniques for achieving this kind of intuitive awareness.
Right.
But he did provide some valuable clues and insights that we can draw on.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of those clues?
Well, one thing that he emphasizes is the importance of slowing down.
Okay.
You know, resisting that constant bombardment of stimuli that we're subjected to in the modern world.
Yeah.
I mean, he was writing long before the age of smartphones and the internet.
Right.
But he was already warning against the dangers of distraction and the fragmentation of our attention.
It's so true. It's like we're constantly being pulled in a million different directions.
Yeah.
Bombarded with information and demands on our time. It's no wonder we have trouble like focusing and being present.
Exactly. So one of the first steps towards cultivating intuition is to create space for silence.
Okay.
For stillness.
Right.
For simply being rather than doing.
Okay.
This might involve practices like meditation, mindfulness.
Yeah.
Or simply spending time in nature away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life.
Those all sound like valuable practices. But they also require a certain amount of discipline and commitment, don't they?
They do, and that's where Bergson's emphasis on creative effort comes in.
Okay.
He recognized that cultivating intuition isn't a passive process.
Right.
It requires an active engagement with the world, a willingness to push beyond our comfort zones and challenge our habitual ways of thinking and perceiving.
So it's about stretching ourselves both mentally and experientially.
Yes.
In order to open up to new possibilities.
Exactly. And this can take many forms.
Okay.
It might involve exploring new art forms, engaging in creative activities, having deep conversations with people who challenge our perspectives.
Right.
Or simply being more open to the unexpected and the unknown in our everyday lives.
This is making me think about how Bergson's ideas connect to his own life. You know, he wasn't just a philosopher in an ivory tower.
Right.
He was deeply engaged with the world.
Yeah.
Involved in social and political movements. Always seeking to make a difference.
That's such an important point for Bergson. Philosophy wasn't just an abstract intellectual exercise.
Right.
It was a way of life. A way of being in the world that required us to be fully present, engaged, and committed to creating a better future.
That's really inspiring. It's like he's calling us to be more than just thinkers.
Yeah.
He's calling us to be actors, creators, and agents of change in the world.
Precisely. And I think that's a message that's more relevant than ever in our current historical moment.
Right.
We're facing unprecedented challenges, you know, from climate change to social injustice to political polarization. We need all the creativity, intuition, and collective wisdom we can muster to navigate these turbulent times and create a more just and sustainable world.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive into the world of Henri Bergson.
It really has.
We have explored his radical ideas about time perception, evolution, morality. We've talked about his critiques of other philosophers like Kant. And we've even touched on his interest in mysticism and the paranormal.
Right.
And through it all, what's really struck me is the enduring relevance of his thought.
Yeah.
Especially for those of us who are grappling with like the big questions about the meaning of life, the nature of reality, our place in the cosmos.
Absolutely. Bergson offers us this way of seeing the world.
Yeah.
That's both intellectually rigorous and deeply inspiring.
Yeah.
He challenges us to think differently, to feel more deeply, and to live more fully.
Right.
And that's a gift that keeps on giving.
Well said.
Yeah.
But before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listener with something to ponder.
Okay.
Question to spark further exploration.
Yeah.
Okay. Bergson challenged us to embrace intuition,
Mm-hmm.
to move beyond the limits of our usual ways of thinking.
Right.
But how do we actually cultivate that intuitive awareness?
Yeah.
What are the practices, the habits of mind that can help us tap into that deeper level of knowing?
Right.
It's a question that Bergson himself wrestled with. And it's one that I think is worth exploring further, both in our own lives and in our philosophical pursuits.
That's a fantastic question to end on, and it's a challenge that I think all of us, whether we're philosophers or not, need to take seriously.
Yeah.
How do we bridge that gap between our intellectual understanding and our lived experience?
Yeah.
How do we cultivate that sense of wonder and curiosity that allows us to see the world anew?
Right.
To appreciate the beauty and mystery that surrounds us?
Yeah.
These are questions that Bergson's philosophy can help us to address.
Right.
But the real work begins when we step outside the realm of ideas
Right.
and into that messy, unpredictable flow of life itself.
Beautifully put. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those questions, dear listener.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of Henri Bergson.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the creative evolution of your own understanding.